I am Ethan Cole, a cattleman who once thought he could conquer this harsh land, but now, standing in a dark alley in the town of Dusty Hollow, I have nothing but 15 cents in my ragged pocket and a debt of $200 that hangs like a knife at my throat. The sky above is the burnt orange of sunset, but the color offers no hope. It only serves to sharpen my sense of fate, as if the world is reminding me that tomorrow may never come. I counted the money in my pocket for the 5th time, as if by some miracle the 15 cents would turn into $200. The coins were cold, muddy, the last remnants of a dead dream. My horse, Old Thunder, who had seen me through many a winter, stood in the stables of the horse dealer at the end of town. I had sold him yesterday, for a pittance, just to buy myself a few more days of life before Jed the Snake Calhoun and his minions found me. My pistol, my only remaining companion from the days when I proudly called myself a cattleman, was in the pawn shop this morning. I traded it for $10, enough to pay for a week's worth of cheap wine and a loaf of dry bread. Now I was left with dusty clothes, holey boots, and a heart as heavy as a stone. I leaned against the rotting wooden wall of the alley, breathing heavily, listening for every sound. The sound of hooves echoed somewhere on the main street, each sound like a hammer blow to my chest. Jed Calhoun was no joke. He was a viper, with cold eyes and faster hands than anyone I had ever known. He had killed for a bad word, and I, a failed cattleman, owed him $200 from a foolish poker bet 3 months ago. I had thought I could win, that a lucky break would pull me out of the quagmire, but fate was never on my side. Now I knew Jed was stalking the town, with 3 henchmen armed with guns and ropes ready to make a lesson out of me for anyone who owed him. I closed my eyes, trying to stop the thoughts that were drowning me. Memories of the past came rushing back, like a knife to my heart. I remembered the vast pastures where I used to drive the cattle, the sound of the wind whistling through the hills, and the smile of Sarah, my wife who left me when our cattle died from drought. She couldn't bear to see me fall, day after day, into drunkenness and empty promises. "Ethan," she said, her voice shaking but firm, "you were a man who could make the sky bow. Now you're a shadow of yourself." She left, taking with her the last bit of light in my life. From then on, I wandered from town to town, working odd jobs, but each step only brought me closer to death. The roar of laughter from the rusty spur a few feet away interrupted my thoughts. It was a rough, mocking sound, like a dog barking at a stray cat. I opened my eyes and looked across the alley toward the yellow light coming from the double doors of the tavern. Something intrigued me, a vague sense that something was happening there, something greater than the fear that gnawed at me. I inched my way out of the darkness, my old boots clicking on the gravel. As I got closer, I saw 2 small figures standing in the doorway of the tavern, like 2 fledglings lost in a wolf's den. 2 girls, maybe 11, stood there in tattered, patched dresses, their bare feet dusty. I recognized them as twins, with their tangled blonde hair and sparkling blue eyes, though they were clouded with fear. One held a tiny tin cup, the other clutched a crumpled piece of paper, presumably the lyrics to the song they were about to perform. The laughter from the crowd inside grew louder as the taller girl, whom I later learned was Ellie, opened her mouth to sing. The melody was as clear and innocent as a spring stream, but it was quickly drowned out by boos and jeers. A drunk threw a wet towel, hitting the smaller girl, Clara, in the face. Another yelled something obscene about how beggars didn't belong here. I felt my chest tighten as if someone were squeezing my heart. These girls weren't street performers trying to show off. They were desperate children, orphans perhaps, trying to make a few bucks to survive. I recognized their eyes, the same eyes I saw in the mirror every morning, the eyes of those who had been pushed against the wall by life. I had been a strong man, a man who had led cattle through blizzards, who had stood up to bullies. Now I was a runaway, weak and cowardly, not brave enough to face Jed Calhoun. And yet, these 2 little girls, barefoot and with trembling voices, had stood before that fierce crowd, willing to face humiliation for a meal. I wanted to turn away, to run deeper into the alley, where the darkness would hide me from Jed and his men. But then I saw Ellie wiping Clara's tears, whispering something that made the little girl nod, her eyes shining with determination. They were going to sing again. Their courage shamed me. I had given up, had let fear turn me into a coward. But those 2 girls, small and vulnerable as they were, had chosen to stand, despite everything. Just then, I heard the sound of hooves getting closer, accompanied by Jed Calhoun's deep, cold voice. He was on the main street, just a few blocks away. I could picture his face, with his cruel smile and unforgiving eyes. He knew I was somewhere in this town, and he would stop at nothing until he found me. I probably had only a few minutes before his minions were snaking down this alley, or worse, into the rusty spur. I stood there, my back against the wall, my breathing ragged, my palms sweaty. I had two choices: run, hide in the maze of alleys and hope Jed wouldn't find me, or go into the bar, where the girls were preparing to face the crowd again. I don't know why, but looking at Ellie and Clara, I felt a small fire burn in my chest. Maybe it was because I saw myself in them, people who had been pushed to the bottom of life, but still tried to get back up. Or maybe deep down, I wanted to believe that there was something worth fighting for, even if it was just to protect two girls I'd never met. I took a deep breath and pushed myself away from the wall. My legs were shaking, but I walked toward the light of the rusty spur. The mocking laughter was still there, but it didn't scare me anymore. I didn't know what was waiting for me inside, if Jed would find me, or if I would survive the night. But I did know one thing. If those two little girls could stand up to the world, then I had to try. Maybe, just maybe, in this dusty, dead town, there was still room for a miracle. Standing before the double doors of the rusty spur, I, Ethan Cole, felt my heart pounding, as if it wanted to break free from my chest and escape before I could. But it wasn't Jed Calhoun and his henchmen that held me back this time. No, it was two small figures standing in the middle of the bar's angry crowd, twin girls with tangled blonde hair and bare feet covered in dirt. I didn't know their names yet, but the look in their eyes, a mixture of fear and determination, pierced my heart like a knife. I pushed open the door and stepped into the stuffy interior of the rusty spur. The smell of cheap whiskey, cigarettes, and sweat was thick, mixed with the raucous laughter of drunken men. The kerosene lamps hanging from the ceiling cast a yellow light, illuminating red faces and eyes that sparkled with cruelty. In the center of the room, near the old, scratched piano, were two girls. The taller one, whom I later learned was Ellie, stood tall, her hands clutching a crumpled piece of paper. The other, Clara, was a little smaller, clutching a tin cup as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Both of their dresses were torn and patched together with mismatched cloth, as if sewn hastily from the scraps of life. The crowd, about 20 strong, jeered. A tall, bearded man threw a wet towel at Clara. The laughter was thunderous, and another man with yellow teeth shouted, "You beggars think you're singers? Go back to the pigsty." I felt the blood rush to my head. These men, who felt they had the right to torture others, were like hungry wolves tearing at their weak prey. But what stunned me was the girl's reaction. Clara, though tears glistened on her muddy cheeks, did not cry out. Ellie wiped her sister's face with her torn sleeve, murmuring something that made Clara nod, her eyes shining with determination. They weren't running away. They were going to sing again. I stood there, near the corner of the room, trying to shrink into the shadows to avoid the eyes of anyone who might recognize me. But I couldn't take my eyes off the two girls. I'd seen the toughest men fall in the face of adversity, seen healthy cows wither in drought. But these two kids, with their bare feet and empty tin cups, had something I'd lost long ago. Courage. I remembered my days as a real cattleman, leading cattle through dusty roads, facing blizzards and wild animals. I thought I was invincible, but now, standing before these two girls, I felt small and cowardly, running away from Jed Calhoun and the $200 debt hanging over my head. Ellie lifted her chin, her voice shaky but clear as she addressed the crowd. "We just want to sing a song. Our mamas taught us. We haven't eaten in 2 days." The words were like a stone thrown into a pond, silencing some of the laughter. But the gold-toothed man, whom I vaguely heard calling Big Tom, smirked, took a sip of whiskey, and roared, "Sing, miss! If you make me cry, I'll give you $1. But if you sound like a cat, you'll clean this floor." The crowd laughed again, some clapping as if they were watching a circus act. I wanted to step forward, to scream at Big Tom and the others that they were cowards, bullying two kids, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. I knew that if I showed my face, Jed or one of his henchmen would recognize me. I had only minutes before they came after me. I glanced out the window, saw Jed and the 3 men on the main road, the light from their torches dancing like demons. I could run now into the darkness, hoping to escape Dusty Hollow, but Ellie's eyes, as she took Clara's hand and started to sing again, held me back. I couldn't explain it. Maybe it was because I saw in her a part of Sarah, the wife who had left me, the one who had believed I could do the right thing. When Ellie sang, the world seemed to stop. The melody was clear and fragile, like moonlight through dark clouds, seeping into every corner of the rusty spur. Clara joined in, though her voice was trembling with fear. Their song was unlike any folk song I'd ever heard. It was sad, a song of loss that only those who had lost everything could understand. I felt my chest tighten, as if someone was squeezing my heart. Memories of Sarah, of dead cattle, of nights alone by the fire, came flooding back. I wasn't the only one. A few of the men in the crowd stopped laughing, their eyes vacant, as if they were remembering loved ones they'd lost. But the magic didn't last. Big Tom's laughter broke the moment. "You want money for singing like that? I've heard donkeys out in the stables sing better." He threw a coin at Clara, where it rolled across the wooden floor. I saw Clara bend down to pick it up, but Ellie pulled her back, her eyes steady. "We'll keep singing," she said, her voice small and firm. "Just be quiet." The crowd erupted again, but this time there were murmurs of agreement. An old man at the bar, whom I recognized as Amos, nodded to Ellie as if to say he believed them. I stood there, caught between my own fear and the courage of the girls. I had lost everything, my family, my flock, my honor. But these two children, with nothing but each other, stood there, facing the fierce crowd. I felt ashamed, like I was a coward, hiding in the shadows, while these two little angels fought the world. I wanted to do something, to protect them, but my fear of Jed Calhoun held me back. The hoofbeats were getting closer now, and I knew my time was running out. Ellie and Clara's singing still echoed through the rusty spur, thin but strong, like a wind blowing through the desert. I, Ethan Cole, stood in the corner, trying to shrink into the shadows, but the girls' eyes held me back, refusing to let me run. I thought I could slip away from Jed Calhoun and the $200 debt that weighed on my shoulders. But when the double doors of the tavern swung open, bringing with them the clanking of spurs and the tall shadow of Jed the Snake Calhoun, I knew there was no alley in Dusty Hollow deep enough to hide me. Jed entered, followed by 3 henchmen, each with a gun hidden under his coat. He was tall and thin, with eyes as sharp as knives, and a smile that froze my blood. The crowd in the bar fell silent, save for the girls singing. Ellie and Clara, seemingly oblivious to the danger, held hands, eyes closed, lost in the song. Their melody spoke of a mother, of long, cold nights, of lullabies that would never be sung again. I felt my heart constrict, but Jed didn't care about the music. He scanned the room, and when his eyes met mine, I knew I was out of luck. "Well, well," Jed said, his voice low but razor-sharp. "Ethan Cole, hide behind those 2 busboys. You think you can get away from me?" He stepped forward, his boots clicking on the wooden floor, and his 3 henchmen spread out, blocking any escape. The crowd began to murmur, but no one dared to move. Jed Calhoun was not a man to be messed with, not with 3 guns behind his back and a reputation for killing without blinking. Ellie and Clara's singing began to shake, as if they sensed a change in the air. Clara opened her eyes, saw Jed and the men with their hands on their guns. She held her sister's hand tightly, but Ellie kept singing, her voice high, as if trying to keep a glimmer of light in the room that was falling into darkness. I wanted to scream, to tell them to run, but I knew there was no safe place in this town when Jed had caught my scent. "Enough!" Jed roared, cutting off the song. Ellie stopped, her eyes wide, but she didn't back down. Clara pressed against her, the tin cup in her hand falling to the floor with a clang. "You owe me $200, Cole," Jed said, pulling a pistol from his belt. "And I have no patience for people who don't pay." He pointed the gun at me, and I felt the world shrink to a tiny point of light in the barrel. But then something magical happened. Ellie, her little shoulders shaking, took a step forward, standing between me and Jed. "Sir," she said, her voice small but clear, "we just want to sing. If you let us finish, maybe we can make some money to help him." I couldn't believe my ears. An 11-year-old girl standing in front of a murderer was trying to negotiate to save my life, a stranger. Jed laughed, but it was a cold, mirthless laugh. "Sing? You think a song will get you $200, kid?" He looked at Ellie, then Clara, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not compassion, but the curiosity of an animal weighing its prey. "Fine," he said, smirking. "Sing. If you make me cry, I'll consider it. But if you don't... He tapped his finger on the barrel of the gun, and I knew he had no intention of forgiving, no matter how good the song. Ellie nodded to Clara, and the girls began to sing again. This time, their song was different, sadder, deeper, a prayer woven from grief. It was about a mother gone, about promises never kept, about dreams blown away by the wind. I felt tears well up in my eyes, not because I was weak, but because the melody touched a place deep inside me that I had locked away since Sarah left. I looked around and saw Big Tom, the one with the gold teeth, bowing his head, covering his face. Amos, the old man at the bar, wiping tears from his eyes. Even one of Jed's henchmen stood still, his eyes distant. And then I saw the unbelievable. Jed Calhoun, the man with the heart of stone, stood there, the gun shaking in his hand. A tear rolled down his cheek, glinting in the lamplight. He blinked, as if he couldn't believe it, and I knew the girl's song had touched a dark corner of his soul, a memory of a mother, a sister, perhaps, a life he had tried to bury. But the moment didn't last. Jed wiped his face, growled, "Enough," and raised the gun again. The song was good, but it didn't pay the debt. I knew that Ellie and Clara's magic had shaken the room, but Jed Calhoun was not one to give up easily. He wanted blood, and I was his target. But when I looked into the girl's eyes, I felt a fire burning in my chest. I couldn't let them face this monster alone. With Jed Calhoun's gun still trained on me, I, Ethan Cole, felt time slow down. Ellie and Clara's singing still echoed in my head, though it had stopped when Jed roared. The rusty spur was tense, like a rope about to snap. I knew that unless a miracle happened, I would not survive the night. But then, from the corner of the bar, a hoarse voice broke the silence. "Wait, Calhoun!" Amos, the old farmer with the bark-wrinkled face, stood up. He pulled a crumpled roll of bills from his pocket and slammed it down on the bar. "Here's $50. It's to thank the girls for their song, and if you have any sense, you'll let Cole live." The crowd murmured, and a few turned to look at Amos, as if in disbelief that the drunken old man would dare challenge Jed Calhoun. I looked at Amos, my heart pounding. I had never spoken to him before, only seen him sitting at the bar, drinking whiskey and telling stories no one would listen to. But now he stood there, his eyes shining with a courage I thought had long since disappeared from Dusty Hollow. Jed smirked, but I saw him hesitate. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially in front of a crowd. Big Tom, the gold-toothed guy who had mocked Ellie and Clara, stood up. He glared at Jed, then tossed a silver dollar onto the bar. "I never heard a song like that," he said, his voice hoarse, as if ashamed of what he had done. "Here's to the girls." Another guy, a blacksmith with arms as thick as tree trunks, stood up too, and laid a few coins on the bar. "Give them a chance, Calhoun," he said. Then, like a wave, the rest of the bar began digging in their pockets, throwing money onto the bar. Coins, crumpled papers, bits of silver that glinted in the lamplight. I stood there, stunned, watching the pile of money grow. These men, these rough cowboys, these drunks, these people who I thought knew nothing but violence and whiskey, were standing up for two little girls they didn't know. I felt tears prickling my eyes, not because I was being saved, but because I realized that Dusty Hollow, the town I thought was filled with selfishness, still had some light. Ellie, with a courage I couldn't understand, took a step forward, looking straight at Jed. "Sir," she said, her voice shaking but firm, "is this money? Is it enough to pay Mr. Cole? We don't need it. We just want everyone to be safe." Clara nodded, squeezing her sister's hand, her eyes sparkling with tears but still hopeful. I wanted to scream, to tell them that Jed was not a man to be negotiated with, that he would not care about money or kindness, but I couldn't open my mouth. Ellie's words, simple but powerful, were like a small flame burning in the darkness. Jed looked at the pile of money on the counter, then at Ellie. I saw something flash in his eyes, surprise maybe, or even a little respect. $60, Amos said, after a quick count. "That's all we have." Jed smirked, but the smile was less sharp. He turned to me, the gun still in his hand. $60 doesn't pay for 200, kid, he said to Ellie, but his voice had lost some of its ferocity. but I'll give you a chance. Sing it again. If you make me cry again, I'll take the 60 and we'll call it even." I knew Jed had no intention of keeping his word. He was a snake, and his promises were worth the dust under his boots. But Ellie and Clara didn't hesitate. They held hands, stood in the middle of the room that smelled of whiskey and gunpowder, and began to sing. This time the song was sadder, deeper, as if they were dragging their hearts out to Jed Calhoun. I saw Big Tom bow his head, Amos wipe away tears, and even one of Jed's henchmen turn away, as if not wanting anyone to see him weak. And then I saw the unbelievable. Jed, the man with the cold eyes, lowered his gun. A tear rolled down his cheek, then another. He blinked, trying to hide it, but I knew the girl's song had touched a place even Jed couldn't deny. He muttered something, maybe about a mother or a distant memory, and I knew that even if only for this moment, the girls had won. As Ellie and Clara's singing faded into the air, the rusty spur fell into an eerie silence. I, Ethan Cole, stood there, my heart pounding, watching Jed Calhoun lower his gun, his face wet with tears. I couldn't believe my eyes. The man who had killed without blinking an eye, who had made Dusty Hollow tremble, was standing there, as vulnerable as a child. But I knew Jed wasn't one to let compassion rule him for long. He wiped his face, trying to regain his cool, and I braced myself for the worst. But then, the double doors swung open again, and Sheriff Hannah Blake walked in. She was tall, with tightly tied silver hair and steely eyes. Her hand was on her gun, but her posture exuded the confidence of someone who knew she had the town in her grasp. "Jed Calhoun," she said, her voice calm but authoritative. "I hear you've been causing trouble here, and I have some interesting news from Denver. It seems you're wanted for 3 bank robberies and a murder. Care to explain?" The crowd held its breath. Jed turned, his eyes panicked. He knew he was cornered. "You have no proof, Blake," he growled, but his voice was shaking. Hannah smiled, a cold smile. "I don't need proof when the whole town is willing to testify against you. And I think those 2 girls," she pointed at Ellie and Clara, "have done enough to sway everyone here to justice." I looked around and saw the cowboys, the drunks, the people I had thought knew nothing but violence, standing up. Big Tom, Amos, the blacksmith, and the saloon keeper all looked at Jed with fearless eyes. Ellie and Clara's singing had done what guns could not. It had awakened the conscience of a town. Jed raised his hands, signaling his men to drop their guns. He knew he had no chance. "All right, Blake," he said hoarsely. "You win." Hannah stepped forward, handcuffed Jed, and led him outside, where a group of police officers were waiting. His men followed silently, not daring to resist. As the door closed, Rusty Spur erupted in gasps and whispers. I looked at Ellie and Clara, still holding hands, eyes bewildered but hopeful. The pile of money on the bar was larger now, with coins and bills from all over the room. Amos stepped forward, placing his hand on Ellie's shoulder. "You saved not just Cole's soul, but all of ours today," he said, his voice choking. "Your mother must be so proud." Ellie smiled, a tired but bright smile. "We just wanted to sing," she said. "Mommy said music can heal everything." Clara nodded, hugging her sister. I knelt before them, feeling tears well up in my eyes. "You gave me a reason to live," I said, my voice shaking. "I will never forget that." Big Tom stepped forward and announced that the widow Thompson, the innkeeper, would give the girls a room free of charge. The blacksmith promised to pay for their board for a month. The innkeeper, looking at the broken glass and overturned tables, only smiled. "Every Saturday night this stage is yours," he said, "and whoever disrespects it will be thrown out." As the sun set, dyeing the sky over Dusty Hollow a golden yellow, I led Ellie and Clara out of Rusty Spur. The townspeople gathered around them, not to mock, but to thank them. I looked at the 2 little girls, angels in tattered dresses, and knew my life had changed. I would stay here, not to run away, but to protect them, to rebuild a life worth living. Their song, like a small flame, lit up the town, and I knew that from now on, Dusty Hollow would never again be a place of dust and death.